kind of ended up last class talking about windows, which is in this little tab right here, and how we can draw these windows and color correct something just within a single window. Everything outside of the window would be not color corrected based on the parameter of that node. Or you could invert that window using this button right here and say that everything outside of the window is color corrected and everything inside of it is protected from color correction. So I'm actually going to make sure, first and foremost, going back to my node editor, I'm going to add a new node to this using Alt-S. Oops. Make sure my second node is selected here, and then press Alt-S, and we'll add a new node to the stack. And I'm going to call that node secondary. So let's just say we're in the edit suite with our director and our cinematographer, and they say to us, well, I really like this shot, everything's great with his performance, but I really do wish the light on his face was a little bit maybe warmer and maybe a little bit brighter. He seems a little purpley right here. He doesn't seem that way in some of the other shots. So can you just color correct his face a little bit so that it's a little bit warmer and a little bit brighter? Well, we can do that with a window very easily, but the problem is if we draw this circle around his face and then move that window in, as soon as we press play, he's going to duck out of that window almost immediately, right? So because of that, Davinci has some really powerful tracking capabilities that will track this window, or at least attempt to track this window to whatever its start frame is. Now we're going to see here that this is not perfect, and no tracker normally is. So go ahead and draw or create a circular window around your actor's face here, and then maybe adjust the feather just a little bit. So you can see here in our secondary node that we have this nice kind of window cut out of his face, and we know that anything that we apply down here color correction wise, and our color balance controls are our master wheels, or even in the curves area, is just going to be applied within that window for this particular node. Now with that node selected, I'm going to go back to my window here. So with this window selected, what we need to do is enable the tracker and get that window to track forward for us across time and try and track his face. So if you go over here to the tracker button, which is right next to the window button in this tool panel, see this little tracker tab, it looks like a crosshair. Go ahead and open that up. And what you're going to want to make sure of is that over here in the right hand side of this window, upper right hand side, it should say window right here. You can also use this tool to stabilize shaky footage if you want, but that's not what we're doing today. So we're going to use the window here, and we're going to track this window forward to try and match his face. Now over here beneath these two, this upper panel, are the transport controls and then the tracker parameter controls. So when we have all of these different items selected, this is what is going to be tracked. Okay, so if we have pan and tilt selected, the window will pan and tilt to the best of its ability to track this guy's face. If we have zoom selected and maybe the camera is doing a zoom or there's a dolly in or something like that, the window will try and track the face as the face gets smaller or larger in the frame. Rotation would be any kind of rotation of that person's face, and then 3D parameters are going to add that z-axis to the tracker, so it's going to add depth to the tracker as well. Normally I just keep all of these on. So with my window selected here, I got my window up and I've got my tracker panel open, and I'm also making sure that my secondary node is selected. I'm actually going to go over here to my transport controls, and I'm going to start advancing this tracker forward. So you can see these are rewind, pause, and play buttons, and then you can also track one frame forward or one frame backward. What I'd like you guys to do is just press play and see what happens.
Mine didn't stay on my guy's face.
Mine didn't stay on my guy's face too much either, okay? I mean, it did a pretty good job at the beginning, but once he shoots that gun, you start to lose him, and then it starts to fall apart a little bit here. So now we're grading way too much in this window. So now that this tracker is complete, what we can go back and do is adjust and animate this tracker across time manually to help us control this situation. So what I'd like you guys to look for is in the right-hand panel above the parade, you should see these 3 little diamonds here. And those are keyframe diamonds, and I'd like you guys to click on that. And then I'm going to press on the expand button in that same window to make that a little bit larger in my timeline. So keyframing is telling the computer, telling Davinci Resolve or any software, an exact parameter at an exact moment of time. And then that software will look at different keyframes at different points in time and then interpolate and animate those values based off of those keyframes, right? So what we need to do now is keyframe this mask, this window, so that it continues to follow his face. Now you can see by default when we added this tracker that a keyframe was made at the beginning of the timeline. You see these little balls here? Those are keyframes. So there was a keyframe made at the very beginning, and then there's actually no keyframes on the rest of the timeline from the tracker. What we can do is add manual keyframes to this to tell the tracker where it messed up, and then it will continue to try and interpolate things and make the track a little bit better. So the first thing you'll see in the keyframes window is that this is kind of like an Avid timeline or an After Effects timeline. You've got all these correctors listed, and then you have sizing listed. The corrector is based on the node. So corrector 1 is node 1, corrector 2 is node 2, and corrector 3 is node 3. So we're principally looking at node 3 right now. So the easiest way to keyframe this material is to actually turn on automatic keyframing. And to do that is very simple. What you do is you arm automatic keyframing on each individual track. So if you look at this little lock here on the different correctors and the sizing parameter, to the very right of it is the automatic keyframe button. And if we turn those automatic keyframes on, they'll turn red right there. Those little buttons will turn red, meaning that it's armed for keyframing. And I'm going to go over to where things start to fall apart for me, maybe right around here. And now I'm going to move my mask, my window, just as I did in the window creation tool. I'm just going to move it so that it tracks back onto his face. And you can see by me moving it, because I have automatic keyframe on, it's added a brand new keyframe that says this parameter has been changed at this point in time. So if I rewind backwards, I'll see that because I added this new keyframe, halfway through I've lost some of the tracking data here, and now the tracking box has been moved a little bit. So I'm going to move that box, my window, back over to recenter it on his face. And I'm just going to progress through my sequence here and adjust that window. Now you can see here he's backing away from the camera. So I could now grab my node or my window, and I can grab the control points on that window and adjust the scale a little bit. And now it's going to adjust the scale of the window as well. So I'm just going to keep clicking through the timeline slowly here, just as I would in Avid, using my timeline cursor. I'm scrubbing through. And every time the mask starts to fall away from the person's face, I'm just making an adjustment. And Davinci is logging all of those adjustments and adjusting the mask animation accordingly. So you can add any number of keyframes here. I mean, you can almost go frame by frame if you wanted and adjust every single frame. But you normally don't have to. I've added, I guess, maybe 6 or 7 keyframes to this whole timeline, and it's tracked his face pretty good. And if I make sure that my viewer is on loop, I can watch the track on loop multiple times to make sure everything's looking right when it's in full motion. So once you've got everything tracked out, go ahead and turn off your automatic keyframing. If we open up the corrector, you'll see that it's not just correcting the it's not just keyframing the window, it's keyframing the color correction, it's keyframing everything that you can apply towards that node. So just turn off automatic keyframing and then you should be okay. I'm going to reduce the size of my tracker. I'm going to go back to my parade now. I can now go over to my color balance controls or even to my curves, and I can make an adjustment which affects only his face. So I'm going to bring up the gamma a little bit, maybe the midtones, to make it a little less shadowy. And our pretend director also wanted his face a little warmer, so I'm going to bring out the color balance puck a little bit towards orange to make his face just a little bit warmer there. And if I go extreme with it, you should be able to see very easily what's happening. So this obviously isn't the best result, but you can see what the tracker is doing.
We just need some more white circles on his eyes.
Now, one thing I wanted to show you guys, another type of window that you can create is a Bezier curve window, which is a little more powerful in terms of creating organic shapes. So we know that we can create this square window by clicking on the line tool. And then we can create more points on this window to kind of create this mathematical looking shape here with all these right angles, all these hard angles on it, which is fine. But the thing is that predominantly, in real life, you're usually going to be looking at curves. People are made out of curves. Most things are made out of curves that are natural. So if you use the curve tool and you activate this curve window tool, and what I can do is I can left click on the image to begin a point, to add a point to the image. That's my first point of my window. And then I'll start moving my mouse around to where I want to create another point. And where I've found a point an area to place a point at, I'll left click and hold. So I'm still holding down my mouse button. And when I drag outwards from that point, while still holding down the mouse button, I create these Bezier handles. And I'll continue to add these points with Bezier handles like this. And then when I'm ready to close my window and actually create a window out of this shape, I'll return my mouse right back to that first point. And you'll see that the mouse cursor turns into this little closed circle when I hover over the first point again. And I'll left click again and I'll add that in. Now when I go here to one of these points, I can now adjust the curve of this point by going back to my Bezier handle. If I shrink the handles inward, it tries to make a more right angle connection between the other points. And if I stretch the handles outward, it starts to curve the line between its connecting points. So what I found using these custom curves, especially when I do compositing work in After Effects, is that they're really great for drawing shapes around human contours. So this simple circle mask that we used just for this exercise was fine, but honestly, if I wanted to be more surgical with it, I would draw. Let me reset my grade so it's not distracting there. I would draw using my custom curves. I would draw kind of a Bezier handle shape around his face instead, which is going to be much more accurate in the way that it handles the contours of his face than just that simple circle. And it's going to be more accurate than those straight edge buttons that we were using last class. So I can very easily and quickly draw out the shape of his face in a much more accurate way using these Bezier curves. And then I could track that forward if I wanted to.